The story of the mind is not merely the telling of strange things which men have thought about themselves, nor is it only the chronicle of marvelous theories and passing speculations. It is the attempt to trace, in orderly manner, what the human spirit has discovered concerning its own operations, and to lay bare the principles by which consciousness is to be understood. When one first comes to the subject, there is a feeling of strangeness, as if we were setting out to look at that which, of all things, is nearest and most familiar, and yet discovering it to be elusive, difficult to grasp, and prone to vanish the more closely we seek to hold it. For the mind is at once our instrument of knowing and the object to be known, so that in the very act of inquiry it changes its aspect, and the explorer and the thing explored are one. It is therefore of the first importance to recognize what psychology has to do. Psychology is not merely a catalogue of curious cases nor a parade of technical names. It is the science of the facts of consciousness, the science of the mind. By mind we mean all those activities which belong to thought, to feeling, and to will. Whenever we perceive, remember, judge, desire, or resolve, we are exercising mind, and it is these exercises taken together which make up the inner life. To treat of the scope of psychology is to mark out its domain, to say where it begins, what it includes, and how it touches the other sciences. The distinction between mind and body has been the oldest problem of philosophy. The plain man says without hesitation that he has both body and mind. The body he can see and touch, the mind he cannot, yet he is assured of it by the very sense of his own identity. The hand may grow feeble, the eye may be dimmed, yet the eye which sees and feels is not the hand nor the eye. From this common conviction men have passed to theories which seek to describe how the two are related. Some have said that the body and mind are but two sides of one reality, showing themselves differently according as we look outward or inward. Others have maintained that they are separate substances which somehow interact. Still others, denying any commerce between them, have supposed a pre-established harmony by which their courses run in perfect parallel without interference. Whatever the theory, the distinction itself persists, and psychology finds its task just in tracing the phenomena of the mental order and marking their dependence on the physical frame, while never confusing the two. In the earliest days, long before psychology bore that name, men were already curious concerning the nature of the soul. The poets sang of the shades in the underworld. Philosophers debated whether the soul was fire, air, or harmony. Priests taught of its immortality and its rewards. Yet these speculations, lofty and often noble, were lacking in method. They did not observe, compare, and analyze. They assumed, they imagined. They reasoned from figures of speech. With Aristotle there came the first great attempt to bring the facts of the mind within a system. He declared that the soul is the form of the body, that its faculties are to be distinguished according to their functions, and that growth, sensation, and reason belong to successive levels of life. This conception, though mingled with errors, endured for centuries and shaped the thought of the schools. The modern period brought a new spirit. Men like Descartes began to doubt the inherited teachings and to appeal to consciousness itself. Cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, became the watchword. The study of ideas, their origin and connection, took the place of scholastic disputes. Locke traced them to experience. Hume dissolved them into impressions and associations. Kant sought to show the conditions under which knowledge is possible. Thus the problem of mind passed through many stages, each adding something of value, each leaving its mark on the growth of the science. Yet psychology as a science in the strict sense had still to arise. That required two things. First, a recognition that mental states are facts to be observed and described with as much care as physical events, and second, the invention of methods by which such observation could be rendered exact. The first of these came with the growing spirit of natural science in the 17th and 18th centuries. The second began to be realized in the 19th, when experiment was applied to sensation. Reaction times were measured, and the laboratory made its appearance as an instrument of psychology no less than of chemistry or physics. It is this union of introspection with experiment which has given the modern science its character. But we must not think that method in psychology is simple. To observe the mind is to make use of the mind in observing. We cannot place it before us as we do a stone or a flower. What we can do is to attend to our own states as they arise, to compare them, to note their sequence, to register the conditions under which they occur. We can also compare the reports of others, study the development of children, observe the behavior of animals, and trace the results of disease or injury upon the mental life. We can appeal to history and literature as records of how men have thought and felt, and we can, by experiment, control the circumstances so as to test the effects of stimulus and practice. In all this, care must be taken to avoid illusion, prejudice, and the danger of reading into the facts what is not there. The purpose of psychology is not exhausted by the description of states of consciousness. It seeks also to explain them, to discover their laws, to show how one leads to another, and how the whole fabric of mental life is woven. The psychologist asks why sensation passes into perception, why memory follows upon impression, why habit fixes action, why emotion stirs the body, why volition issues in conduct. In asking such questions, he is not content with mere curiosity, he is guided by the belief that the mind, like nature at large, is ordered, that it proceeds according to principles, that its phenomena can be brought under rules. The mind is not chaos but cosmos, not caprice but law. Let us then consider more closely the distinction between mind and body, for upon this hangs much of our understanding. The body is extended, divisible, material. It exists in space, it can be weighed and measured. The mind is not extended, it cannot be divided, it cannot be weighed. When we think of a number, the thought is not in space. When we remember a face, the memory itself is not colored or figured like the face remembered. And yet the two orders are bound together. The brain is the organ of mind, and when the brain is injured, the mind suffers. A blow on the head may blot out consciousness, a lesion in the cortex may destroy speech, a fever may bring delirium. The dependence is constant and striking. But dependence does not mean identity. The violin may be broken and the music silenced, yet the music is not the wood. In like manner, the mind is more than the matter on which it depends. It has often been asked whether psychology should be called a natural science. The answer depends on what we mean by natural. If by natural we mean dealing with phenomena, describing them, and seeking their laws, then psychology is a natural science. But if by natural we mean confined to the material and mechanical, then psychology transcends it, for consciousness cannot be resolved into atoms or forces. The safest course is to say that psychology stands midway between the natural and the philosophical, borrowing from both, yet possessing its own field. It borrows from physiology the study of the nervous system, from physics the measurement of stimuli, from philosophy the analysis of ideas. But its own field is consciousness, and in that field it is supreme. There is another aspect of psychology which must be emphasized: its relation to life. The mind is not a plaything to be studied in abstraction. It is the very instrument by which we live, act, and build civilization. Education is the application of psychology to the training of youth. Medicine finds in it the key to nervous disorders. Law appeals to it in questions of testimony and responsibility. Religion cannot ignore it in dealing with conversion and faith. The scope of psychology thus widens until it touches every interest of man. To understand the mind is to understand ourselves, and to understand ourselves is to gain mastery over the world. As one pursues the inquiry, the conviction grows that psychology is not a closed or finished science. It is young, it is still gathering material, still perfecting its methods. New discoveries are constantly enlarging its borders. The study of heredity, the analysis of language, the exploration of unconscious processes, the investigation of abnormal states, all contribute fresh problems. Yet through all diversity, the central aim remains the same: to know the nature, the growth, and the destiny of the mind. When we speak of the purpose of psychology, then we mean both its theoretical and its practical ends. Theoretically, it seeks to give a complete account of the mental life, to classify, to explain, to unify. Practically, it seeks to furnish guidance in education, in conduct, in social relations, in the adjustment of man to his environment. In this sense, it is both science and art. It is science in its knowledge, art in its application. And in both respects it appeals to the deepest interest of mankind, for to know and to guide the mind is to touch the center of human endeavor. It will be seen, then, that the study of psychology demands seriousness and patience. It is not to be mastered by casual reading nor by clever speculation. It calls for disciplined observation, careful experiment, logical reasoning. It demands also humility, for the mind is subtle and often deceives us. Many a hasty generalization has been overthrown, many a proud theory has crumbled. But each failure has been a step to clearer vision, each error a lesson in caution. And so the story of the mind, while full of vicissitudes, is also a record of progress. Thus the way is prepared for the more detailed examination of the several parts of our subject. We have seen what psychology is, what its scope, what its method, what its purpose. We have marked the distinction between mind and body. We have glanced at the early approaches and the later developments. The task before us is to follow out in order the chief operations of the mind, to describe their nature, to trace their laws, and to show their significance in the life of man. And in doing this we shall remember always that it is not a matter of idle curiosity, but of profound importance, for the story of the mind is the story of ourselves. The study of the physical basis of mind begins with the recognition that the organs of the body form the conditions upon which consciousness depends. Of these organs, the most important is the nervous system, for it is through this system that impressions from the outer world are received and responses are made. The nervous system is the central highway of communication within the body, uniting the parts into a whole, and without it the living organism would be but a collection of uncoordinated tissues. The nervous system is composed of two main divisions, the central and the peripheral. The central consists of the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral consists of the nerves, which pass out to the muscles and organs and bring back impressions from the senses. Together they constitute the machinery by which the body is governed and through which the mind gains its hold upon the world. The elements of this system are the nerve cells, or neurons, with their fibers and branches. The neuron is the unit of structure, and each neuron is a living cell with a body, processes, and terminal filaments. These processes connect with other cells and thus form a network through which currents pass. In the gray matter of the brain and spinal cord the cell bodies lie thick, while the fibers stretch away to connect with distant parts. The importance of the neuron lies in its excitability, its power of transmitting a stimulus from one end to the other, and its tendency to modify its paths by use. In this way, the nervous system not only carries messages, but learns to carry them better, forming habits, fixing associations, and laying down the traces of memory. The brain is the supreme organ of this system. Its convolutions and lobes are not mere folds of tissue, but the seat of the higher functions of life. The spinal cord alone is sufficient to carry on many reflex acts, to control muscles, and to secure a degree of coordination. But when the brain is added, there appears a new order of events: perception, reasoning, voluntary action. Within the brain, regions are distinguished according to their control of movement, their reception of sensation, or their association in thought. The occipital lobes are bound up with vision, the temporal with hearing, the central convolutions with motion and touch, while the frontal areas are believed to be concerned with the higher processes of judgment and will. Yet these distinctions are not absolute, for the brain acts as a whole, and the harmony of its parts is essential to normal consciousness. When we ask how body and mind interact, we come upon one of the oldest and deepest questions of philosophy. That there is a constant relation is certain. A stimulus falling upon the sense organs is carried to the brain, and we become aware of a sensation. A resolution formed in the mind is carried outward by the motor nerves, and the muscle contracts. If the brain is injured, memory may fail, speech may be lost, personality itself may be altered. These facts testify to the dependence of mind upon body. Yet the dependence is not identity. The thought is not the current, nor is the will the contraction of a fiber. The physical event and the mental event accompany each other, but they are not the same. Psychology must be content to study the order of the mental, while physiology studies the order of the physical, leaving to philosophy the ultimate problem of their union. Among the simplest and most instructive operations of the nervous system are the reflexes. A reflex act is one which takes place automatically in response to a stimulus, without the intervention of conscious will. If the hand touches a hot surface, it is withdrawn before we are aware of the pain. The path is from the sensory nerve to the spinal cord, across to the motor nerve, and out to the muscle. Reflexes are the basis of life, for they secure breathing, circulation, swallowing, and countless adjustments. They are inherited arrangements fixed by the evolution of the race. Yet they may be modified by experience, for new reflexes may be established and old ones inhibited under the influence of the higher centers. Thus, instinctive action and conscious control meet in the nervous system, and habit is the bridge between them. Automatic actions resemble reflexes in that they go on without attention, but they are more complex and often depend on practice. Walking, writing, playing an instrument, once laboriously learned, may afterwards be carried on with little thought. The nervous system, by repetition, acquires fixed paths of discharge, so that the act becomes easy, rapid, and sure. Here again the physical basis is evident. Each performance strengthens the channels, lowers the resistance, and makes the act more natural. This explains why early training is so important, why habits once formed are hard to change, and why education must seize upon the plastic years of youth. When we turn to the physiological foundations of consciousness, we find a subject full of interest and difficulty. The brain is the organ without which consciousness does not appear, and yet the precise relation between cerebral process and conscious state is hidden. We know that stimulation of certain regions produces sensation, that destruction of others abolishes it, that fatigue of the nerve cells corresponds with dulled awareness, that intoxication or disease clouds the mind. We know also that activity in the association areas of the cortex corresponds with the complexity of thought, and that the integration of brain functions is necessary for the unity of consciousness. But beyond these correlations we cannot go. The passage from motion to thought, from cell discharge to idea, remains mysterious. We can only register the concomitants and seek to trace it more exactly. One of the most striking facts is the localization of function. The brain is not a uniform mass, but a system of organs within an organ. The sensory areas receive impressions from the eye, ear, skin. The motor areas send out impulses to the limbs, the association areas connect, and sensation is the doorway of the mind, the means by which the outer world first gains entrance into consciousness. Without sensation the mind would remain empty, and all the higher processes of thought, memory, and imagination would lack their material. Through the senses, we become aware of the manifold qualities of things, and from this basis, the edifice of knowledge is built. The senses are therefore the primary instruments of mental life, and a careful account of them is necessary if we would understand the growth of perception and the formation of ideas. There are 5 which have from antiquity been recognized as fundamental: sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, though it is known that within these divisions finer distinctions can be made. Yet the 5 are sufficient to show the variety of the means by which man comes into relation with the world. Sight is the most highly developed and the most intellectual of the senses. Through the eye we gain acquaintance with form, color, distance, and movement. The retina is a delicate sheet of nerve endings responsive to light, and upon it fall the rays which objects reflect. The impressions are carried to the brain, and there arouse the sensations of brightness, hue, and outline. By constant association, the mind interprets these signs into things, so that we seem to see objects themselves, rather than mere patches of color. The eye gives us the power to grasp a wide field at once, to distinguish minute differences, to perceive the relations of part to part. It is the organ of space perception, and upon it the sciences of geometry and astronomy rest. Yet even in vision the process is not immediate, for the infant must learn to connect the sensations with the realities they signify, and illusions often betray us into errors. Hearing, while less exact in space, is of profound importance for time and sequence. The ear receives vibrations of the air, translates them into sensations of sound, and thus conveys to us the tones of speech, the harmonies of music, the noises of environment. By hearing we are enabled to perceive rhythm, to follow succession, to detect direction by differences in intensity. The ear is the social sense, for by it we communicate with our fellows, preserve the treasures of language, and transmit the heritage of thought. Its delicacy is marvelous, detecting vibrations numbering thousands in a second, distinguishing timbres of instruments, and recognizing the voice of a friend among many. Yet, as with sight, the meaning of sound is learned, and false interpretations may arise when echoes, distance, or confusion mislead us. Touch is the primitive sense, the one most directly connected with action. Through the skin we are aware of contact, pressure, temperature, and pain. In the hand touch attains its highest refinement, for there the nerve endings are abundant and the control of movement is exact. By grasping and exploring, the child first gains acquaintance with solidity and shape, and even in adult life the assurance of touch is sought to correct the vagaries of vision. Touch is the basis of our sense of reality. To touch a thing is to be sure of it. The blind man relies upon it for his picture of the world, and all men use it to verify what the other senses suggest. Taste and smell, though less intellectual, contribute to the fullness of experience and have their place in the economy of life. Taste reveals the qualities of sweet, sour, bitter, and salt, while smell discerns a vast array of odors. Both are closely allied with appetite, warning us against what is harmful and attracting us to what is wholesome. They are also powerful in awakening memory and emotion, for a faint odor may recall scenes long forgotten, and a flavor may revive associations of childhood. These senses, though seemingly humble, are links between the body and the environment, securing nourishment and safety and enriching the diversity of consciousness. From these elementary sensations arise perceptions. A sensation is a simple awareness of a quality, such as red, cold, or loud. A perception is the recognition of an object as possessing qualities combined. To see red is sensation. To see a red rose is perception. The transition from the one to the other is the work of the mind, which groups, interprets, and gives meaning to the data of sense. The infant at first has only disconnected feelings, but gradually he learns to synthesize them into things. to recognize the same object by different senses, and to expect certain qualities when others are present. Thus, the unity of perception is formed, and the world of things comes into view. Illusions reveal the process at work, for they show us how the mind interprets and sometimes misinterprets the signs. A stick partly immersed in water looks bent, though it is straight, because the rays are refracted. The moon appears larger on the horizon than in the zenith, though its size is the same because of the way the mind estimates distance. Sounds may seem louder by night than by day, because of the contrast with surrounding silence. In each case, the error is not in the sensation itself, but in the judgment based upon it. Illusions are therefore instructive. They teach us that perception is not a passive reception, but an active construction, in which the mind brings expectation, habit, and inference to bear upon the crude material of sense. The relation between sensation, perception, and knowledge is intimate and vital. Sensation supplies the raw material, perception organizes it into objects, knowledge builds upon perception to form concepts and truths. Without sensation there could be no perception, without perception no knowledge. Yet each stage transcends the one before. The concept of triangle is not merely the memory of many visual impressions of figures. It is the abstraction of the common form and the recognition of its universal validity. Knowledge is thus rooted in sense, but it is not limited to sense. It rises upon it as the tree rises upon the soil, drawing sustenance yet producing fruit far beyond the earth from which it springs. When we inquire into the beginnings of mental life, we must start with sensation. The infant, fresh from the womb, is already endowed with sensitive nerves and responds to light, sound, touch. His cries testify to pain, his quiet to comfort. Gradually the sensations are coordinated, movements become purposeful, and perceptions are established. The smile which greets the mother's face, the reaching hand that grasps a toy, the turning of the head toward a voice, these are the signs of perception emerging. In these early months, the foundations of the mind are laid. From the play of sensation and movement arise the habits, the memories, the associations which later grow into thought and character. The beginnings are small, but they contain the promise of all that follows. Just as in the seed lie the potentialities of the tree, so in the first flickerings of sensation lie the capacities of intellect, emotion, and will. It is instructive to observe that even at the dawn of consciousness the distinction between self and world is foreshadowed. The child feels his own movements, the resistance of objects, the satisfaction of appetite, and in these contrasts the germ of self, consciousness, is present. Sensation is therefore not only the source of knowledge of things, but the occasion of knowledge of self. As perception develops, the self becomes clearer, until at last reflection and thought make it explicit. Thus sensation is the fountain out of which both knowledge of the world and knowledge of self spring together. The study of sensation and perception shows us then how dependent the mind is upon the body and its organs, and how marvelous is the transformation by which mere nerve currents are interpreted into a universe of objects. It shows us also the fallibility of sense, the need of caution, the possibility of error. Yet it reveals above all the constructive power of the mind, which does not lie passive before impressions, but weaves them into order, invests them with meaning, and builds upon them the fabric of thought. In tracing this process we come to appreciate more deeply the wonder of consciousness, which out of the crude and fleeting touches of sense has wrought the stable and significant world in which we live and act. Memory is the great conserver of experience, the faculty by which the fleeting impressions of sense are retained and made available for future use. Without memory, life would dissolve into a succession of disconnected moments, each perishing as it came, leaving no trace behind. Memory binds the past to the present, gives continuity to consciousness, and lays the foundation of knowledge, character, and personal identity. When we remember, we reawaken a former state of mind, bringing it back into the light of awareness, and thus we are able to profit by what has been before. The simplest form of memory is mere retention, the persistence of an impression after the stimulus has ceased. A sound continues to reverberate in consciousness even when the ear hears it no longer. A picture lingers before the mind's eye when the object is withdrawn. This immediate after effect shades into the more lasting forms of recollection, where impressions return after hours, days, or years. The degree of vividness varies, sometimes a past scene rising before us with almost the force of present perception, sometimes only a dim shadow or a suggestion remaining. The laws by which memory works are laws of association. It is not by accident that one idea recalls another, but according to definite principles. The first of these is contiguity, by which experiences that occurred together tend to be remembered together. To see a book may bring back the thought of the friend who gave it. To hear a melody may revive the occasion when it was heard. The second is similarity, by which one idea calls up another like it. A face may remind us of another face with kindred features. A story may bring to mind a different story of the same type. The third is contrast, by which opposites suggest each other, as light recalls darkness or wealth recalls poverty. These laws are not separate, but often work together, forming the intricate web of associations which constitutes the treasure house of memory. The richness of a man's mind depends upon the abundance and variety of these associations, for the more numerous the connections, the more readily will one experience lead to another, and the more fertile will be the play of thought. Imagination is closely allied with memory, yet it is more than memory. Memory seeks to revive what has been, imagination constructs what has not been. Out of the fragments of past experience, the mind creates new forms, combining, transforming, and inventing. This constructive process is seen in the play of children, who turn a stick into a horse, a heap of stones into a castle, a tale into a world of wonder. It is seen in the poet, who out of remembered sights and sounds shapes visions of beauty and grandeur. It is seen in the scientist, who by imaginative insight frames hypotheses to explain phenomena. Imagination is not mere fancy nor idle dreaming, but a vital function of mind, enabling man to transcend the limits of sense and to project before him ideals and possibilities. Without imagination there could be no art, no invention, no progress, for all advance depends on the power to see beyond the actual. Habit is the counterpart of memory on the side of action. Just as impressions are retained, so actions are fixed by repetition. A movement once made tends to be made again, and each performance strengthens the disposition to repeat it. Thus habits are formed, which render conduct easy, automatic, and sure. The importance of habit is immense, for it economizes effort, leaves the higher powers free for new problems, and gives stability to character. At the same time, it is a source of danger, for bad habits fasten themselves with equal tenacity, and their chains are hard to break. Hence the wisdom of training in youth, when the nervous system is plastic and habits are easily established. The direction given in those early years often determines the whole course of life, for the grooves once worn become the channels of later action. The growth of mental connections is the underlying process which makes memory, association, imagination, and habit possible. The nervous system, with its countless cells and fibers, forms the physical basis. Each impression leaves a trace, each act a modification. When the same path is traversed again, the resistance is less, the current flows more readily, and the act is easier. This physiological fact corresponds with the psychological law of association, and together they explain the stability and plasticity of mind. The more connections are multiplied, the more complex becomes the mental life, and the greater the resources of thought and action. Education is essentially the deliberate cultivation of such connections, fixing useful associations, developing fruitful habits, and stimulating constructive imagination. If we look more deeply into memory, we see that it has different forms. There is recognition, the sense that a present experience has been known before. There is recall, the bringing back of an absent idea without external suggestion. There is reproduction, the reappearance of past states in dreams and reveries. Recognition is the basis of knowledge, for to know is to recognize. Recall is the test of learning, for what we can reproduce we truly possess. Reproduction reveals the hidden depths of mind, where forgotten things lie ready to emerge under favorable conditions. The accuracy of memory varies with persons, some having extraordinary power of retaining names, numbers, or forms, others excelling in memory for sounds or for places. Training can improve memory, yet it is well to cultivate it in harmony with one's natural bent, rather than against it. Association also has its varieties. It may be mechanical, as when a jingle of words fixes itself in the mind, or it may be logical, as when ideas are connected by relations of cause and effect. The higher forms of thought depend upon the latter, yet even the mechanical has its use in preserving language and custom. The secret of a well-furnished mind lies in the richness and order of its associations. The trained thinker has not only many ideas, but ideas arranged in such manner that one leads naturally to another along lines of relevance and significance. Imagination again may be reproductive or productive. Reproductive imagination recalls and pictures past experiences, as when we see again the scenes of childhood. Productive imagination goes beyond the past, creating new forms. Within this lies the distinction between fancy, which plays lightly with combinations, and imagination proper, which works seriously toward construction. The highest use of imagination is in idealization, the power to see not only what is, but what ought to be, and thus to inspire effort toward its realization. Habit has its psychological laws. The law of exercise declares that repetition strengthens habit, the law of disuse that neglect weakens it. The law of effect affirms that acts followed by satisfaction are more likely to be repeated, while those followed by discomfort tend to be dropped. These laws show how habit is at once a natural necessity and a moral responsibility. We cannot escape forming habits, the only question is what kind. Hence the importance of vigilance, of wise direction, and of early training. The old maxim well says, sow an act, reap a habit, sow a habit, reap a character, sow a character, reap a destiny. The growth of mental connections may be compared to the weaving of a web, where each new thread strengthens the fabric. In infancy the web is thin and few stranded, in maturity it is thick and intricate. Each sensation, each act, each thought adds its strand. The mind is thus a growing organism, continually building upon itself, carrying forward the past into the present, and preparing the present for the future. The marvel is that amid all this complexity the unity of self is preserved, memory binding together the manifold into a continuous whole. Thus in memory we have the persistence of experience, in association the linkage of ideas, in imagination the creative use of material, in habit the fixing of action, and in growth the enlargement of the system of connections. Together, these processes constitute the very substance of mental life. They show us how the past enters into the present, how the mind builds upon its own achievements, and how the individual is at once the product of his history and the architect of his future. Thought arises out of the materials furnished by sensation and memory, yet it is something higher than either. Sensation gives the immediate data of consciousness, memory preserves and revives them, but thought takes them up, compares them, connects them, and draws from them meanings which they do not contain alone. Out of the multiplicity of impressions thought secures unity, out of the succession of events it discerns relation, out of the confusion of the moment it frames order. The rise of thought is therefore the transition from the particular to the universal, from the fleeting to the permanent, from the individual image to the general idea. When the child first distinguishes one thing from another, when he recognizes likeness and difference, when he groups experiences together under a single head, thought is already at work. Without memory, there could be no material for comparison, and without sensation, there could be nothing to recall. Yet with both supplied, thought is able to transcend them, producing concepts, judgments, and inferences that belong to a new level of mind. Judgment is the simplest act of thought. It is the assertion that something is or is not, the recognition of relation between subject and predicate. To say the rose is red or the stone is heavy is to unite qualities with objects, to ascribe attributes, to affirm existence. In judgment, there is both analysis and synthesis, for the mind separates qualities and then recombines them under the form of a proposition. Reasoning proceeds from judgment, drawing new judgments from old, advancing from premises to conclusions. It is reasoning which gives coherence to thought, enabling us to pass beyond what is immediately present and to foresee consequences. In problem solving, this power is put to the test. The mind is confronted with a difficulty, weighs the conditions, considers alternatives, applies principles, and seeks a solution. Here memory contributes the record of past experience. Imagination suggests possible lines of action, and judgment and reasoning select among them according to their fitness. The process is often slow and tentative, but it is by such groping that discovery is made, and through it man has conquered nature and established civilization. Language plays an indispensable role in thought. Without signs to fix and communicate ideas, thought would remain vague and fleeting. Words are the symbols by which concepts are held fast, preserved, and transmitted. They are not mere labels, they are the very instruments of thinking. To name is to classify, to define is to distinguish, to argue is to manipulate words as carriers of ideas. Language makes possible the growth of abstract thought, for without it the mind could hardly retain general notions or handle complex relations. Moreover, language is social, binding men together in the sharing of thought, making the wisdom of one generation the inheritance of the next. It is through speech that reasoning becomes articulate, that judgment is embodied, that the treasures of knowledge are built up and handed down. To study thought apart from language is to ignore its most powerful ally. Volition, or will, is the aspect of mind in which thought passes into action. The will is not a separate faculty set over against intellect and feeling, but the expression of the whole self in activity. To will is to choose and to act upon that choice. The nature of will lies in the fact that ideas, once entertained, tend to discharge themselves into movement, and that among competing ideas one gains the ascendancy and issues in action. Volition is thus not caprice, but the organized outcome of motives. The strength of an idea depends upon its vividness, its emotional coloring, its congruity with the habits of the individual, and its harmony with the system of purposes already established. When one idea surpasses its rivals in force, it determines the will, and the act follows. Conflict, choice, and decision are therefore essential features of volition. Often several motives present themselves, drawing the mind in different directions. The prospect of pleasure contends with the fear of pain, the call of duty with the lure of ease, the immediate advantage with the distant good. In such cases the self is divided against itself, and there is struggle. The outcome depends on the balance of motives, but also on the power of attention, by which one idea is held before the mind while the others are allowed to fade. Choice is the focusing of consciousness upon the selected course, decision the final adoption of it as one's own. In decision the conflict ends, the self asserts itself, and action begins. The history of character is largely the history of such choices. For each decision strengthens certain tendencies and weakens others, building up a system of habits and ideals that guide future conduct. Thought, reasoning, and will thus form a continuous process. Thought supplies the materials of reflection. Reasoning connects them, will applies them in action. The three are not separate but phases of the one life of mind. In sensation and memory we have the groundwork. In judgment and reasoning the superstructure, in volition the crown and completion. Through them the mind is not only contemplative but practical, not only knowing but doing, not only passive but creative. The story of thought and will is the story of man as a rational and moral being, capable of truth, responsible for choice, and destined to shape his own destiny. The growth of mind begins with the life of the child, in whom we may see repeated in brief outline the larger history of the race. The infant comes into the world endowed with a nervous system already organized by heredity, yet plastic and capable of immense modification. His earliest states of consciousness are sensations, vague, fleeting, and without order. There is at first no distinction between self and world, no sense of permanence, no recognition of relation. Gradually, through repetition and association, the fragments of experience are knit together, and a rudimentary unity is formed. The smile that answers the mother's face, the cry that secures relief, the grasping of an object, these are the earliest tokens of development. From such beginnings the entire fabric of mental life is woven, sensation passing into perception, perception into memory, memory into thought, and thought into will. The development of the child shows how the higher processes rest upon the lower. The power of attention must be exercised before memory can be stable. Memory must be active before reasoning can take place. Imagination must be free before ideals can be framed. At each stage the past furnishes the material for the next, yet the new process is not a mere repetition of the old, but a transformation of it. The earliest associations are simple contiguities, but later they become logical connections. The first efforts of imagination are wild and uncontrolled, but later they become disciplined and productive. In this way the child advances step by step, each period of growth preparing the way for that which follows, and the mind expanding with marvelous rapidity in the first years of life. It is in childhood that the foundations of knowledge, habit, and character are laid, and it is upon these that the superstructure of maturity is built. The relation between the development of the child and that of the race has been recognized as one of the most significant facts of psychology. The child in his growth repeats in abbreviated form the evolution of mankind. What the race has achieved slowly through ages of struggle, the child rehearses swiftly in a few years. Primitive instincts reappear in him, primitive fears and superstitions, primitive forms of play and fancy. The savage lived by imitation, and the child is the most imitative of beings. The savage expressed himself in crude language, gesture, and art, and the child likewise delights in these simple forms. The doctrine of recapitulation, though not to be pressed in detail, reveals a profound truth, that the individual is a product not only of his own experience, but of the long inheritance of the past. He is born into a world already furnished by the labor of countless generations, and his own growth is both a continuation of that labor and a reproduction of it. Evolutionary psychology seeks to interpret mental life in the light of this history. It shows how faculties have been developed because they were useful in the struggle for existence, how instincts were fixed by survival, how intelligence arose as a means of adaptation. The fear of the dark, the love of play, the impulse to imitation, the tendency to believe in unseen agencies all have their roots in the history of the race. The child carries these tendencies within him, and education must reckon with them, guiding, refining, and transforming them into higher forms. What was once necessary for bodily safety may now be transmuted into intellectual curiosity. What was once a wild passion may become an element of moral strength. The child is thus the heir of the past, but also the promise of the future, for in him evolution continues, and through him civilization is carried forward. The social factors in mental life are of profound importance. No child develops in isolation. From the first he is a member of a group, surrounded by family, nurtured in speech, controlled by custom. The mind is essentially social, for it is through intercourse with others that it finds expression and growth. Language is learned from parents and companions. Habits are formed under the influence of example. Beliefs are adopted from tradition. Ideals are inspired by the community. Even the sense of self arises through contrast and comparison with others. To know oneself is to know how one differs from and resembles those around. Society thus furnishes not only the content of thought, but the very form of self-consciousness. The moral life in particular depends upon social relations, for duty, responsibility, justice, and sympathy have no meaning except as men live together. The development of the mind is therefore inseparable from the development of society, and psychology must take account of the social environment as well as the individual organism. The unity of the mind across sensation, thought, and will is one of the most striking facts of psychology. At first these seem separate, as if feeling, knowing, and acting were distinct faculties, but closer examination shows that they are inseparable aspects of the same life. Every sensation involves an attitude, every thought involves feeling, every act involves knowledge. To see a flower is at once to feel its charm, to think of its kind, and perhaps to stretch the hand to pluck it. To deliberate is to weigh motives colored by emotion and to issue at last in decision. The unity of consciousness is thus preserved through all diversity of function. The mind is not a bundle of faculties, but a living whole in which sensation, thought, and will interpenetrate and support one another. This unity is the ground of personal identity, the reason why amid the ceaseless change of states we remain the same self. In concluding reflections upon the story of the mind, one is impressed by both the greatness and the limitation of our knowledge. We have traced the rise of consciousness from sensation to perception, from memory to imagination, from thought to will. We have seen how the nervous system furnishes the physical basis, how association and habit knit experiences together, how language makes thought articulate, how social life shapes the self, how the child repeats the history of the race. We have recognized the dependence of mind upon body, yet also its power to transcend the body, creating ideals and purposes that reach beyond mere survival. We have acknowledged the marvel of its constructive energy, weaving the fragments of sense into the unity of knowledge, and directing action toward the future. Yet we have also confessed our ignorance of the ultimate mystery, how matter and mind are related, how consciousness arises, what destiny awaits the soul beyond the limits of life. The story of the mind is therefore not a closed book but an unfinished record. Each generation adds to it, each discovery enlarges its scope. Psychology is still young, still gathering its materials, still perfecting its methods. The laboratory explores sensation, the clinic investigates disease, the school experiments with education, the social sciences trace the influence of custom and tradition. From all sides contributions are made, and the prospect is that the coming years will see a fuller understanding of the nature and laws of consciousness. Yet, however far science may advance, the mystery of personality will remain, the wonder that each self is unique, irreplaceable, and capable of freedom and responsibility. The story of the mind is the story of man himself, his struggles, his triumphs, his hopes. To study it is not only to satisfy curiosity, but to gain wisdom for conduct, courage for endeavor, and reverence for the great gift of consciousness which makes us what we are.